Hello, everybody. We're going to speak English here. So, my name is Ilya, and I will introduce you Brian Matthews, who's going to show you how to better use Docker in your development loop. So, Brian Matthews is a very experienced developer. He has a lot of experience in various realms, C++, for example. He has been working in a lot of companies all over the world, but right now, Brian Matthews is a developer from Rostov. So, yeah, Brian Matthews, everybody. Brian, I was looking through your presentation. I couldn't help but notice that the database you're using is not the one with the elephant. How did it happen? Tell me, please.
Well, it's just habit. I mean, it's more commonly used in corporate environments in Ireland that we use MariaDB rather than any other database, like as an alternative. And it's as an alternative to Oracle. That's pretty much. So people migrate from Oracle to MariaDB, and that's it.
I migrated from Oracle to the elephant. So we're going to have a coding session. You can ask questions, but in Telegram chat. So, please hashtag your questions with a question or вопрос. We're going to answer them in the end. And also, if you have questions which you want to ask, you should ask them after the coding session. Also, there is a QR code, and you can find your Telegram chat with it. So, ladies and gentlemen, Brian Matthews, have a nice talk.
Hi, everybody. So I've actually been programming with Java since '98 and with Spring since like 2006. So I've a lot of experience with Spring in particular, and I've sort of grown with it, I think. And I really like the features that have been added very recently in the 3.0 versions, and this is one of the features that we're going to talk about. The inner development loop of where Spring Boot can help, and with the Docker Compose support in the inner development loop, is in being able to make your unit, or adding better unit test coverage to your build step in the inner development loop, and also making it easier to run and debug, to run ad hoc tests very easily without having to have a lot of software installed on your machine and reset environments and things like that. Also, when you're looking at the testing pyramid and a simplified version of it, like the idea of like being able to write good unit tests, that are white box, but then move that line up so that you can actually write integration tests using the same way that you write unit tests, and get fast response times, is really what we're going to be able to do with Docker Compose and Testcontainers. So in the past, what you would have been able to do is you could have used embedded systems like a H2 database, JMemcached. If we're using memcached in the talk. These are not always an option because, well, they're not feature complete. They might have different dialects, and in the case of JMemcached, that project seems to have been pretty much abandoned, even though in previous projects we've been using that. So that's not really a good option to be. The other thing that we used to do in the past was we used to use a lot of shared environments where each developer would have their own slice of a database set up. But of course, it makes it difficult to tear down contents in database and stuff like that. And also, it meant that you were tethered to the network, so you couldn't work on the road. And Docker Compose and Testcontainers sort of get us away from all of those issues. Like with Docker Compose, we get rid of not having to worry about manual installation and configuration of environments. We don't have any dependencies on external systems. And it's consistent, no matter, it works. You don't have the "it works on my machine" problem. Of course, the drawback of Docker Compose is that you have to hard code the configuration details in your tests, and also there's like out of the box with Docker Compose, you're going to have to manage the container lifecycle manually. They're not really big problems, but they're sort of problems. Test containers sort of improves things much better, or improves on the whole Docker Compose thing by allowing you to launch the Docker containers from within your tests. And it does the dynamic port assignment, so you don't have to worry about the conflicts with other versions of the component that might be running on your machine. You're getting rid of a hard-coded configuration in terms of port numbers and host names and things like that. And it also automates the container lifecycle as well, like so it'll stop and start the containers as tests stop and start. And the bonus then with test containers then as well is that you can, because there's no hard-coded port assignments, it's easier to run this in a CI pipeline. In terms of Spring, like there is a drawback in that you need to configure the application properties. You need extra code to do that. It can't just detect. And it's really aimed at automated unit and integration tests rather than anything higher up the food chain. So what happened in Spring Boot 3.1 is they introduced this feature called development time services. And the whole goal of this was to improve the experience when you're using Docker Compose and Testcontainers. And it adds in container lifecycle management for Docker Compose. It reduces the amount of hard-coded test configuration that you're going to need, and for both test containers and Docker Compose. And out of the box, it supports a number of well-known containers like databases, message queues, and various different, LDAP and stuff like that, various different things. So, like, there's a list of the systems that are out of the box are supported by Docker Compose, by development time services. Now, the way it does this is it's introduced a new abstraction called the ConnectionDetails. So prior to Spring Boot 3.1, it was properties then configured the beans that were the data source or whatever you're used to connect. But now we've got this extra step where we configure the properties as before, but then they're used to configure a ConnectionDetails object. And then that ConnectionDetails object is what just the properties that you need to connect to the system. So you might have whole loads of connection pooling going on. They're not necessarily in the ConnectionDetails. They're in the properties, but the ConnectionDetails would just have the host, the URL for the database, the username, the password, the transaction manager, and stuff like that. So the bare minimum that you would need. So talking about it diagrammatically, it's like there is the JDBC ConnectionDetails is what you use to connect to any JDBC database. And you still use the Spring. If you're just using the old, not using the feature, you just use the properties as before. They get mapped to the data source properties bean, and then the data source properties bean configures the ConnectionDetails object. And that is always in there. So for no matter what system you have, there's always going to be a version of the ConnectionDetails that just is driven by the properties. And what happens then is if you add in a dependency called Spring Boot Docker Compose, that then has all the extra logic that it needs to connect to detect and connect to containers run by Docker, within the Docker Compose lifecycle. And then the Spring Boot Testcontainers similarly does the same thing if Testcontainers is being used in your application. Now, what they're going to do is when they define these beans, they're going to override the default. And you can have both of them in the project at the same time, but really you probably only want to use one or the other. You want to use test containers or Docker Compose. Okay, so let's actually step into looking at what we're going to do. How we do that in code. And that URL in the slide will actually take you to the presentation, to the repository that contains the presentation and the demos. So what I have here is a simple project that if I run with a Docker Compose up, if I run Docker Compose, it will launch a Memcache service and a MariaDB database. And then I can then run my application just as in the environment. Second. All right. So if I just run this application, there we go, run. So now it's able to connect to what's there. Now I haven't done anything. This is just out of the box. I haven't added any features. And this is just a simple service that implements a shopping cart, which I can add things to. The shopping cart is in Memcached, and then there's a product catalog in MariaDB. So I just added something to the cart there, and I can just run it. But the problem with that is that to do that, I had to have hard-coded configuration here to tell me where the database is and where the Memcache server is, right? So that's not really going to be suitable if there's already something running on those ports on my machine. So that's where test containers will come in. But also the whole thing is I had to start this up manually. I had to put the configuration in, and I want to avoid doing that. And this is what the developer time services allows me to do. So what I can do is I can just go to add in the Docker Compose dependency. So when I add this Docker Compose dependency, now I'm able to just straight away connect to the MariaDB database, because MariaDB is supported. So I don't actually need to tell the configure. I don't need to tell my system where MariaDB is. Docker Compose, developer time services will actually be able to find that, and it will also. So I should actually stop the. It will also manage the life cycle of the containers. So I don't need to have those containers running previously. I can just run the application. And you can see in the in the logs there that it's actually starting up the containers for me as part of the startup of the services. Now, since I've added that, my shopping cart, since I restarted, my shopping cart is empty. So I can add things back to the shopping cart there. Right. But there's still something missing here. And what's missing is that there's no support for other systems. Out of the box, there's no support for Memcached, and I don't want to have Memcached in here at all. So I don't want to have to configure Memcached. I wanted to figure that out when I'm starting up. So I'm going to take that out, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a connection factory, so the ConnectionDetails factory for Docker Composed and Memcached. So the names are a bit are a bit long because this is an existing project, and so I'm going to create a Docker Compose connection. Sorry, xmemcached. Connection. Sorry. Docker Compose connection details factory. So yeah, that's the hardest thing is the length of that name. Now, so a connection details factory is going to contain the logic to recognize and connect to containers in Docker Compose. And what we have to do is we have to actually extend a specific class. Where's it gone? So we have to extend this Docker Compose connection details factory and tell it what type of connection details we're going to have. So this is the memcached connection details, which I created in a starter project. And that memcached connection details, it just has in there one attribute, which is the list of socket addresses for the memcache servers. So now what I need to do is I need to get this factory, tell it how to recognize Docker Compose, and we do that in the constructor. So we add a constructor that takes two arguments, and the first that calls the super constructor with two arguments. And the first argument is the list of the containers that it supports. So in this particular container, I'm going to support in this particular example, I'm going to support the official memcache container and the Bitnami version. And the other parameters, well, it's a variant argument list, but you need to give it the names of classes that it should look for on the class path before it will activate this container. So since I've made it work with the xmemcache client, so I'm going to look for that on the class path. Now we need to give it a factory method that will actually create the connection details object. And this is just like it's going to return the connection details object, and it's passed in this source object, which is what we actually need to connect to Docker Compose, to the container that's running in Docker Compose. Now, I have to then actually implement the connection details object itself. So typically it's done as an inner class. And this again, it needs to implement, it needs to extend a specific base class for Docker Compose. Extends there. So it just needs to extend this Docker Compose details. Now, when we create the constructor for it, we have to do two things. We have to pass that running service to the base class, but also, since we're going to need to query information from the container, we have to save a copy of that. So we're just going to save that here as well, add it as an attribute. Quicker to just copy and paste sometimes. Okay, and then the last thing that we have to give this class is we have to implement the methods. So there's only one method to implement, and that's the addresses. So we can just now. So it's going to query from the container. Now, because we're using supporting memcache, Bitnami's memcached, one of the things about Bitnami is that you can override the port number that it listens on via an environment variable. So we've just put that in there as, we'll first check that, see if there's a value defined for that, and then we'll use that. Otherwise, we'll fall back to the default memcache port. We'll just assume that it was the official image. And then what we can then use is we need to get the socket address for that memcache server, and we'll just use the running service to get the host, and also find out what the mapped ports were. So that sort of thing there, ports, just gives you the list of that returns the mapped ports, and we just look up by the port number. Now that I've done that, the only other thing I need to do is I need to register it. So you register them in Spring Factories. File. Factories. Register. So now this will just run it in the, or sorry, that will register it. So we just, the class that we created, we added it to the factory registrations for connection details. And now it means then we can go back to, oh yeah, I've already removed the property for the memcached address. And now I can relaunch the container. I relaunch the application, all the containers start again. We can check the cart is empty, we can add items to it, and then they're added to the container. So we can connect to the memcache server without having to provide the property with the address in it. Whoops. So then the next thing is if you have unit tests, you might also want to use Docker Compose in the unit test. Now, I don't really recommend it, but it is possible. So I have these unit tests here, and they've got hard coding in the unit tests. So what I can do is I can just disable Docker Compose. By default, Docker Compose is disabled when you're running. Enable. Docker Compose is disabled when you're running unit tests. So you can explicitly turn it on just via this property to enable it. And all the Docker Compose related properties are started with the Spring Docker Compose prefix. So now I can actually run these tests here, unit tests. And while they're running, yeah, it's running there. So while they're running, we can move on. So the other thing is, that's great for if you're maybe doing ad hoc testing and on your machine. But what if you want to actually put this into the builds, into your CI/CD pipeline? And that test containers is better suited for that. So there is extra support in test containers to help us do this. And the difference here with the test containers is that we have to create the beans for the containers within our code. So the first thing that we need to do is add the dependency. And that's Spring Boot. Add boot. And we're adding two dependencies here. We're adding the Spring Boot test containers dependency itself, which will support various things out of the box, but we also have to add in the test containers dependency for the container that we're going to support, which is MariaDB. Now I can go back to my code. I can create a configuration bean. Containers, config. And it's just going to be a test configuration. And turn that off. And I need to put in a couple of beans in here for the containers. So I can add a bean for the MariaDB. So with MariaDB, since there is a test containers module for it and it is supported out of the box by Spring Boot, what we can do is we can just create that and create a bean for that container and annotate it with @service_connection. And @service_connection is the magic. So when anything that's added with service connection, it's going to try and create a connection details object for you. Now, the other thing is then we need a bean also for the memcache server. Now, this one isn't supported by Spring Boot out of the box, so we're just going to create it as a normal container, as a generic container. And that means now that we have to have some way of configuring the properties for that bean. And we can just use dynamic registration beans for that. So we can just register the property. And like it's a slight update to the dynamic property source, just to allow it to be defined as a bean. It's a dynamic property register. And all it's doing there is it's just building up a string with the host and the port number in it. Now, I can now add another class, another thing that you can do with, you can add a test application. So this is just a way of running the application, but including the test code in the application execution. So we give it a main method. We tell it to base this on the main app method for the actual production application, and then we tell it where to get any sort of configuration that we need. So we need to add in the extra configuration for the test containers beans. Now the other thing is, if I run this now, I can run this now and it'll run the server. But the only catch is, because Docker Compose and Test containers are both on the class path, it will actually start the Docker Compose versions of the containers as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a profile to disable that. So you can just add additional profiles. I'm just going to call it test containers. And then just add some application properties that are specific to that profile. Application. YAML. Add. And now I can disable. And now using another property, I can just disable the Docker Compose integration. But just because it's on the test resources class path, it will only affect it if I run test application. It won't affect it if I run application, the main class. And so now I can actually just run that. And as before, we can just add items to the cart. Sorry. I think I added them twice there. Yeah, I added it twice there. So that's just adding it to the cart. So everything's still working. And this time we're using test containers instead of Docker Compose. So all the ports are being assigned dynamically, and it makes it ideal for environments where you might have stuff running already on your machine. You might have a local copy of MariaDB for some reason, or you might actually have two applications that you're testing at the same time. Both of them are using MariaDB, so there's no possibility of a conflict there. So now the next step is, how can I get it to work with memcached, get it to automatically recognize a memcached container. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create another connection details factory. Okay. So that it just works. Java package. Okay. Now, new Java class, and again, test containers. Cached connection container connection details. I'd never get a job as a data entry operator. Okay, that's it. So add that. Now this can just be. This also has to extend a base factory. It's a different one. So, and the difference here is that, let's get this. that we have to tell it also what type of container we're going to be looking for. And because we're using generic container, we're just going to say container, just the base, the absolute base. Now, the constructor for this has different requirements. So what we have to do here is we have to give it, instead of the image names, what we do is we give it a name that we can apply to the service connection bean. So we're going to use the service connection bean with the value of memcached, and that's how this will recognize it. But as with the other connection factory, we also need to give it a class to look for on the class path to activate it as well. Add connection factory. And the connection factory, it takes a different, or sorry, the factory method takes a different parameter, and it's just, this one is actually just the container interface. And we're going to add in implementation. So this has to also extend the base class. So again, we're extending a base class, which is ConnectionDetails, container connection details, and with the type. We have to pass up the source to the base class. And now what we can do is implement. Now we can just add the addresses method. And again, it's pretty much the same logic, but different code. So what we can do now is we can use this container object, which is basically source that we passed up to the base constructor. And we can use that, and we can get the environment. We use a different method to get the environment variables, and we use a different method to get the mapped port. But it's still essentially the same thing. And this too also has to be registered. Directory, sorry, file. In Spring Factories. And you'll notice as well that I'm putting the test containers code on the test class path rather than the application class path. Okay, so I can just register the guy in there. And now, if I run the test application again. Oh, sorry. I forgot. We can also simplify the containers configuration bean. So what we can do here is we don't need this dynamic registration bean anymore. And what we can do is we can just add in this service connection. So now that's all running there now. And again, same deal, add items. Memcached is definitely working because when we added the items to the cart, they got added. Right. Now, the last thing there to do with that is we want to turn that back into update the tests so that they will use that. And this is the nice thing about it. The tests can just use just need to import the connection details, or sorry, the containers config bean. We don't need to disable things in Docker Compose because they're disabled by, or sorry, enable it in Docker Compose anymore. We don't want it running in Docker Compose. And now we can add this to the other unit test and take out that property override. And now stop that. And we can run it. Run the test. So I can run the unit test there, no problem. Okay, so really quickly then, the last thing that I want to do is, that's all well and good for a container that's, that you have support for, right? But, or sorry, that there's a test modules for. But if you already have it, you can create a test module for your own containers, or sorry, test containers module for your own container types. And that's what I've done. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add that in here as a dependency. Add. And now I'm able to just go to, I'm just going to copy this. I'm not going to, ConnectionDetails, I was going to call it. All right, and we're going to just call it memcached. Cached. That, and now we've just, I'm just going to, so I've added this, there's this in this module, in that module that I added, there's an object called memcached that has a nice DSL for getting the socket addresses, and also it sets up the wait strategy and the mapped ports. So it simplifies what I need to do. So I can now go back to here, and I can, oh yeah, and we can also get rid of the dependency on having to have a name. So because it can now do it by type. And so I can just add this in here. So the name there. And now I can get rid of the configuration to expose the port and to set up the wait strategy. I just need to go back to this guy here. And so I'm just going to change it to any connection name. So it's just going to, because it's going by type, we don't want to narrow it down by the name. And then the last place we need to make a change is we need to register that bean as well. And just register. And now, if we run I'll just run the unit test. So the unit tests now can run. There's less code this way. Obviously, all the code has been moved out into that other project. So that's it.
Okay, Matthew, thank you very much. We have a little bit of time. So are there any questions from the audience? Question, please.
If you do same, again, for today, right? Do you choose the exactly same way, or maybe you can prefer something else, such as like Minikube or full Kubernetes running your machine?
Oh, yeah. Right, so this is just for Docker Compose. If I was doing, and this is only like where I want to be able to have stuff that runs in the build lifecycle or runs really quickly. But if I want to do much more, a bigger scope of testing, I actually use Scaffold. And I've played around with Tilt and Dev Spaces. I prefer Scaffold. Tilt would be number 2, and Dev Spaces I find a struggle. So, but yeah, I use a Kubernetes cluster for that.
Hello. Can you think about some better way to to pass the name of a container that you have in Docker Compose? For example, if I want to run the test in different environment, and I want to pass different container names, do you think it is possible to do it through like annotation value or something?
Yeah. So there's an annotation that you can use in Docker Compose. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but you can put a label in Docker Compose on the container, and then that label is how it recognizes the containers. And the other thing as well is you can also control, if you have a Docker Compose file that has multiple profiles in it, there's also a property, a Spring Boot property that will say which profiles to activate. Yeah.
Okay, let me read one online question. So usually we need to see what actually happens in the DB, in the container. So test containers assign random port, and I need to change the connection config in my DB client every time. So can we automate client connections?
You mean like if you want to do it manually? No.
No.
It's painful.
So
what I would do is I would add automated tests that verify what's in the database. Assert JDB isn't that great, but that's what I use.
I think test containers had a feature where those test containers didn't disappear after the test run. So maybe maybe you could use that.
Yeah, I think so. I haven't used that in a while.
So there was a setting. I'm not sure if it still exists, but there was an experimental setting. So also you have put ConnectionDetails factory in your production sources, not in test sources.
Yeah, and that's true. That's the only reason I did that is for the purposes of the demonstration. But all of this code is actually elsewhere. There's another project that I've open sourced, which has this memcache. It's a starter. It's like memcached Spring Boot starter. So if you use that, there's links to it in the talk. That has all that code externalized. Because I could actually delete all of that code now that I've added. That's to do with memcached, and just add in that starter, and the tests and the applications would all work, no problem.
So maybe questions from the audience? Are there any?
Yeah, I had another question during the show. So you added Spring factories in a file, but I really can't remember when was the last time I used that. Can you just like make them as beans or something? I mean, can I have some other way to register the factories? Yeah.
So I don't know. This is the simple answer to that.
I will check it later.
Oh yeah, I'm just going.
Yeah.
I haven't read more in the documentation than this is the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed this is the way Josh Long did it as well. So.
Okay, and I think the last online question, and then we go to discussion. So could you please elaborate on your code completion settings? How do you generate entire methods?
Yeah. So because there was a lot of typing, and I'm very bad at typing, what I did was I set everything up using IntelliJ live templates. So I just set them up, and based on the context, it will recognize what I type in and convert that to code. So it's like, it's an
IntelliJ IDEA feature, right?
Yeah. Whoops, hang a second. What did I do? IntelliJ settings. So that's it there. It's the live templates. And so I just grouped them all in there under, put in a group, just all the templates that I was using here. And the only thing that I would say for people who are going to use this feature is when you're putting in the class names, it's a good idea to put in the fully qualified class names, because that way you get IntelliJ will actually put in the imports. But if you don't put in the class names, you'll just end up having to add in the imports manually afterwards. So.
Okay, so we'll take the other questions in the discussion, and there's a QR code, and please, Matthew is waiting for you. Brian Matthews, yeah, he's waiting for your feedback. Feedback is very important for us. And now, thank you very much. We go to discussion.
Okay. Thank you.